You know, there's a funny thing that happens when I do lists of who I think is the best or who is my favorite. I know it's going to get a bunch of downloads. Claude Giroux played most of last season on the wing. He also took over 1,000 faceoffs. See, what the Flyers and Dave Haxtell figured out last year is what some coaches have started doing. We complain a lot about referees and linesmen and them kind of, the whole power trip they go on the ice and this kind of thing. And part of that power trip is linesmen throwing guys out of the circle. Now, by having Giroux, who can play any forward position, play with Couturier in the middle, means if Couturier gets thrown out of the circle, Giroux goes in, and Giroux had a 56% winning percentage on faceoffs. I still qualify Claude Giroux as pretty much a center, for the reason that if something happens to Couturier this year, whether it's a setback on the score sheet, he gets injured, something like that, Giroux slots right back into the middle. So I understand that having him at number 5 on centers, he's listed as a center everywhere. So when people talk about NHL.com, almost any website, he is still listed as a center. Even on the Wikipedia page, it just says forward. So, again, I understand people are like railing against that. The funny thing is he'd been a center his entire career until this past season. And taking over 1,000 faceoffs, that translates to 13 a game, meaning he's still playing a center position on the ice at least a few times a game. Now, that out of the way, okay, let's get into the Flyers and the kind of versatility they have because of Giroux being able to do that. They had 98 points this past season. They had 88 the year before, 96 the year before, 84 the year before, 94 the year before. So, again, they're one of these teams that does that, which means they're due for a downturn, which means they missed the playoffs. All right, well, this was the fastest preview. No, I'm just kidding. Top 5 cap hits, Claude Giroux, Jakub Voracek. James Van Riemsdyk comes in at 3rd. Andrew McDonald's 4th. He's a UFA at the end of this year. Yuri Laterra comes in at 5th. He's a UFA at the end of this year. Laterra, I'm pretty sure they've had him buried in the minors at times, haven't they? If they haven't, why not? McDonald's a guy who a lot of Flyer fans were not happy with a couple years ago. I don't hear the complaints now that I used to, and I think it's because they don't need him in as prominent a role as they did a couple of years ago because of the emergence of some of these young kids that are in the lineup. Plus player, I put Provorov. Provorov is so damn good, and if you haven't watched him, I recommend Barkov first and Provorov second, as guys you may not hear as much about now that you will later. Minus player, I put hopefully not the goaltenders. If goaltending is a struggle for them this year, this is a team that could do that dip back down into the mid-80s and fall out of the playoffs. And that would be very disappointing to the Flyers and their fans and continue a narrative that every Flyers fan is tired of. The MVP for me, and again, I took heat on this during the year, where I said I thought Couturier was more the MVP for their team than Giroux. During parts of last year, I really felt Couturier was the guy who was steering the ship. Giroux got all the points. By the end of the year, it was clear that Giroux was the better player of the two. To me, my mind had flipped on that by the end of the year, that Giroux had a better season than Couturier, but it was close. And Couturier has had this explosive breakout year. Now he has to follow it up and show it wasn't just a one-hit wonder, that he can follow it up with another excellent season offensively. We know he can do the job defensively. Can he continue to progress offensively? Your top 6 forwards in Philly are as follows: Giroux, Couturier, Konechny, Van Riemsdyk, Patrick, and Voracek. Now, Nolan Patrick stands out. Going into his second year, can he make that next step as an offensive player? And if he plays with JVR, how much will that help him, playing with a goal scorer like that? Now, what JVR is also going to do is he's going to help their power play. JVR on the power play is deadly. So the Flyers can throw a number of deadly weapons on the attack. This top 6 can score a ton of goals. And this top 4 can prevent a bunch of goals. So you got Ghost, you got Provorov, Sanheim, and likely McDonald, maybe Haig, Does Gudas get top 4 minutes? Probably not, but this is probably, and again, Haig could get in there as well. If Haig gets in there, let's just say that Haig plays the top 4 minutes on this team. That'd be a very young, talented blue line, which is what we were saying a couple years ago about Philly, about watch out for this blue line. Once they get some experience, the Flyers are going to be a very tough team to play. Welcome to the future. They're here. In net, this is where it gets tricky. Elliott and Neuwirth. Does Neuwirth stick around? Does Neuwirth, if he doesn't have a great camp, get bumped out by a rookie? Anthony Stollers, I don't have on the board. He was a guy I anticipated being the Flyers' number 3. Due to injury, he lost that spot. Does he get it back? I like Stollers. I think in his brief call-ups in the past, I think he was solid enough that I think he could be an NHL backup. But again, once you get past for that spot and once injuries have been an issue, it's really tough to get that back. Additions, Van Riemsdyk and Christian Folland steps in as a depth guy on the blue line. Probably their number 7, I would think. I can't see him bumping any of the aforementioned players out of their spots. I'm especially interested to see what Haig does this year. He's a bus out there, and it'll be interesting to see what he does. So Folland, probably not going to get a ton of ice time. Their playoffs, well, it's very consistent. 2018 first round, 2016 first round, 2014 first round, 2015, 2017, nothing. Which means 2019, nothing. If they're going to follow this pattern, and some teams do, it's so weird how that pattern can exist like that. That you have up year, down year, up year, down year. Now, I also want to throw in, because people are going to say something if I don't, that Wayne Simmons is a guy who's not in this top 6, who there's a team out there that will see him as top 6, and I really think he's going to get moved. I'd be very surprised if he doesn't get moved, because Wayne Simmons has always seemed like a guy who would have a very high market value if he was available. He's big, he can score, he can hit. While Philly loves all those things as well. If Konechny is at that level now where he can play here, if Nolan Patrick is ready to start taking on more of a load, and if the rest of the toughness through the lineup can handle it, then Simmons absolutely could get moved out. Now, for what? That's really the trick, isn't it? They don't seem to need any more scoring. They don't seem to need anything more on the blue line. And for goaltenders, well, teams that have, the excellent number 1, like, they can't just trade Simmons back to LA and say, can we have Quick? And expect LA to have a brain fart and Rob Blake not hear the phone right and just go, yeah, sure. And I'll figure out what he said later. So this is likely to be the tandem, and if not the rookies, I have Alex Lyon as the most likely. Morgan Frost coming out of 112 points in junior. He may push for a roster spot. And then Danik Martel, who played a handful of games for them last year. He is 5'8". One guy's 5'8". He can play bottom 6, but man, he's got to be really strong on the puck. Your smaller skill guys have to be your top 6. It's something that I've discussed before, and I know that long before I came along, there was basically a belief that it was this. A player has to be skilled enough to be top 6. They have to be defensively capable and probably big enough to play bottom 6. If a guy's not quite big enough or powerful enough for bottom 6, if a guy's not quite talented enough for a top 6 on a team, he's either going to spend his career in the American League or end up playing over in Europe. So that's why when people say, well, you're not mentioning these players, I'm still of that mindset that your bottom 6 are probably going to be bigger forwards than your top 6. And your top 6 has to be your most talented. Should be. I mean, really. There are some teams that put, a tougher player in the top 6, but normally they have some goal scoring to them. Even in Calgary, Ferland was getting all kinds of ice time, but he was putting up points too. So without the points, I would think he'd get dropped off that line. Now, how did the channel vote? Well, the channel had 4.1% voting for Philly to be first. 9.7% said second. So that's 13% of the vote said Philly could be first or second. And I like that. I like that, going out on a limb and saying Philly could pass either Pittsburgh or Washington. And usually it seems like it was probably Pittsburgh people were picking, which makes me think it might be Philly fans who are doing that voting, or people who just don't like Pittsburgh. 28.2% had them in third. 23.4% had them in fourth. 17.7% had them in fifth. 11.2% had them in sixth. 3.3% had them in seventh. And 1.4% had them in eighth for some inexplicable Penguin fan reason. I will say this. The goaltending makes me nervous. It does, honestly. But even with below average goaltending, this team, I can't see them finishing any lower than fifth. And this was the division that I really went over, and I was like, okay, make sure. And even as I mentioned in the New Jersey video, I was really hemming and hawing. I wanted to put New Jersey in third, but I just couldn't justify having them ahead of the Flyers. So for me, the Flyers are third. I'm agreeing with the majority of the vote on this one. But that being said, 23.4% had them in fourth, 17.7% had them in fifth, and 11.2% had them in sixth. Those are not insignificant numbers. And I don't think that's all just Penguins fans voting them down either, because the Flyers are very unpredictable. And again, they look like they're due for a down year. Now, whether they are or they aren't is a completely different topic, but they appear to be. Now, if Giroux falls back, and I'm not expecting a 100-point season out of Claude Giroux again, I'm expecting 80. I would think 80 is realistic. But if this line falls back, then watch Nolan Patrick and this JVR Voracek line. If that's a line, if it's JVR, Patrick, or Voracek, this line could end up being your first line. Or you could have a Toronto-Tampa kind of situation where you have two first lines. And that's a very nice luxury and problem to have, where you have two first lines. So they're fighting each other and competing with each other for ice time. There's nothing quite like that competition. From a Canuck fan perspective, one of the things that caused the Sedins to score as many points as they did is because they were competing with each other. And I didn't hear as much of it later on in their career, but there was a competition about I'm 1 point ahead of him. I'm 1 point ahead of him, and that competition within the team. So if these two lines are comparing notes and going, we've got 2 goals tonight. Yeah, well, we've got 3. That's 5, and you're winning the game. So it'll be interesting to see what happens with the Flyers this year. I'm optimistic. I think this year, I think they could win a round. And I think if they win a round and they get that confidence, and if Elliott can be what he was in St. Louis, this team could be dangerous and they could be a dark horse. But let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through. You just happen upon this video. And hey, thank you guys so much for watching. I'll talk to you again soon.